All right. So we are into session 2 for the forgiveness series. Last week, just as a quick recap, we talked about the stages of forgiveness, and there are 6 of those, and we walked through them last Wednesday just to get a firm understanding and footing about what forgiveness is and how we use these steps to forgive. So today we're going to talk about forgiveness in the workplace. So if everybody remembers, last week we talked about forgiveness resides wherever hurt can be found, right? And hurt can be found at work as well as at home. And so today we're going to talk about what it looks like with forgiveness at work. So if a team member works for an organization where there is forgiveness and there is a space that is being created to forgive, it means the culture of the organization understands people will and do make mistakes. So it becomes what we call a second chance organization. So they foster and destroy environments where team members are secure in the knowledge that the organization will help them understand their mistakes and put into place resources that will build their skills to avoid making the mistake again. So a lot of times we make mistakes and then there's nothing there to kind of close or bridge the gap in terms of why the mistake was made in the first place when we talk about work. It could be that I didn't fully understand the process, right? Or it could be that I was on a phone call and I didn't necessarily know how to navigate it because the scenario has never come up before. So things like that. If that happens, though, what are we putting in place to kind of close the gap if it was due to a learning curve that this individual made the mistake? Or maybe this person was trying to be accountable for a situation and insert themselves in a way that perhaps they shouldn't have. But in their thinking, they're helping the situation when in fact they probably should have asked for assistance outside of, say, a peer group or within their position. And those are just 2 examples. I'm sure we could think of more in terms of what it looks like when we talk about workplace and mistakes that happen in it. But in the mistakes that are happening, do we have anything in place that allows us to cover the mistake or educate an individual on the mistake, allow them to grow from the mistake, and then not be judged by the mistake later? Does that make sense to everyone? Or does anyone have anything to kind of add there with regards to that? Everybody good? Okay. So why is forgiveness overlooked at work? So one of the things is many of us see forgiveness as a trait or act that is isolated to your personal life. We don't see forgiveness at work because people don't talk about forgiveness at work. How many people have ever talked about forgiveness at work? In your history of working, has forgiveness ever been a topic at work?
Only with you.
Only with you, Nicole.
Yes.
I guess we're the first, right?
But before that, has it ever been a topic?
No. Never knew it
existed. Something that you discussed? No,
never
right?
knew it existed. Right.
Never
knew something like that existed.
Right, because most of the time when we talk about forgiveness, we're talking about things that happen to us personally, friends, family, things of that nature. But forgiveness is not necessarily in the borders of the parameters of a job or an organization. The other reason why is because forgiveness is considered faith-based. And it's led by your spirituality and therefore has no place at work. Now, what do you think about that?
I believe that. I truly do believe that that's right on the money, because a lot of times people are very hesitant to bring in God and spirituality into the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is that we really don't think about, okay, well, this person may be angry today, so I'm going to retaliate or whatever I'm going to do. We think about it in more so the law, more so than something that is more spiritual. So you're correct. I think it's something that we just really don't think about because society has not warned us to do that at work.
Right. It's like that separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't look at faith in that way, because when you think about faith, we talk about faith in God, faith in our spirituality. And so because it's associated with religion and spirituality, it therefore does not have any place in work because of how it is looked at, or its origins are steeped in spirituality, which is a separation of church and state. I don't bring church into state matters, but we actually do, because if you look on your money, what does it say on the back?
In God we trust.
Oh, okay. So there is, there is some overlap there, right? And so I think we have to think about, in terms of when we talk about forgiveness, it is not isolated to our spirituality. Forgiveness, again, resides wherever hurt can be found. The next one says that forgiveness, because of its roots, should certainly not hold or play a significant role of importance within the confines of work, because of its roots, which go back to what? Your spirituality, your belief in God. And because of that, it does not belong in the confines of work, but we all know that it does, because on our first call that we had, every last one of us expressed where we had actually been hurt at work before. Is anybody not agreeing with that? Everybody's still on board? Okay. All right. So when we think about work, let's all of us go back to a first day. Your first day at work. Everybody just kind of, and it doesn't matter which job, because I'm sure all of us have had several. Pick one, and in that job, what we're going to do is look at how many of us, in terms of work, when your first day at an organization, on day one, you are inundated with the rules, policies, and procedures, as well as the expectations and matrices by which you will be held accountable for. Is that a true statement? When you start a new job, I'm going over policy, what, dress code, clocking in and out. Anything else we can think of? What else are you told? How you're paid.
Attendance. Conduct.
Attendance. So we're given all of these policies and procedures that tell us about the position that we're about to hold. If you are lucky to hold a position or have been tapped to hold a position in leadership, you're also told how you write people up. If your organization is following that protocol, they go through the steps to say, okay, this is what the document looks like. If you put somebody on corrective action, here's what your performance improvement plan looks like. Here, what qualifies as a performance improvement plan. This is a corrective action. How do you file them? How do you submit them? How long they last? What they impact? Does anybody have any experience with those things?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Oh,
right.
yes.
Most
so you're right, and the first thing they'll give you is an employee handbook. And it is also filled with all of those sanctions that we talked about, that says if you don't hit these expectations and matrices, here is how you will be held accountable. And then we sign off on it, do we not?
Yes,
I understand.
we do.
I sign off on all of this saying I understand my expectations. I understand how I'm going to be paid. I understand the attendance. I understand even gifts. If you have a company that talks about gifts, you know how you can and cannot receive gifts, gift cards, monetary contributions, all of that information we sign. But if we look at it, it says that in all that is shared in the multitude of documents that we read and sign when we start our employment, how many of you have encountered an organization who then shares the parameters they adhere to when it comes to forgiveness and the role it plays within the organization?
Never even addressed it.
Never even addressed it. So they give you, go ahead, Sharon, I'm sorry.
No, I said goose egg.
So they give you all of these rules to play by. But then they don't tell you what happens. They tell you what happens when you mess up on the rules. But then they don't tell you how they will help you traverse the rules after the mistake has been made, and what your career of how you look after the mistake has been made. All they say is, here are our rules and here's how we hold you accountable. They don't tell you anything else. And they say that the reason for that is that we can't find those such documents at work because they fall outside of the belief system of an organization. Organizations think that when we forgive, we are disregarding the transgressor's behavior or treatment as a non-relevant event. To forgive, does that mean it's non-relevant?
No.
No, because we just talked about in our forgiving, we learn a what? There's a lesson that comes in it, correct? So when we're learning lessons in this forgiveness bubble, even if I made a mistake, I'm also learning that that's not the way to do it. So the event is not irrelevant ever, but they feel like in the confines of work that if I implore or include forgiveness, we are disregarding that the transgressor's behavior or treatment as a non-relevant event. They also think it makes us appear weak or less than to extend forgiveness. Are you weak if you extend forgiveness? Are you less than if you extend forgiveness? If we learned anything from our first session, we learned that extending forgiveness gives us back our what?
Gives you back your power.
Gives you back your power and takes it away from the person who transgressed or the situation in which you felt transgressed. So how could it then make me feel weak or less than if I'm reclaiming power in my forgiving? Why do you think that's the correlation? That there's a weakness or less than because you forgive?
I really don't know. I really don't know why it's like that. I think it's something that we, like you said, we've really never taught that in the workplace. So like you said, it's nowhere to measure. And I think that's a lot of times where in the workforce, it's some type of policy, some type of law, something to measure, and you can't measure forgiveness. And a lot of times people will see it as, oh, okay, you are agreeing or you're approving it. And we're not approving it. It's something that everybody does. No one's perfect. So you're going to make a mistake. So how do we let that person know that they can build from that? We talk about, okay, well, you can, once we put somebody on a PIP or put somebody on corrective action, we may say, okay, we'll give you a performance plan to get you off that. But like you said, does the bias ever go away? And that's the key. Sometimes we don't really let it go.
It follows you wherever you go.
Right.
We say it won't hold you back, but we see that in a lot of instances it does.
Mm-hmm.
Especially whenever feedback is asked from the leader, if you're trying to grow and develop and they're asking the current leader about your performance and what's taking place, oftentimes they bring up the negative side of what you've done. And that just keeps the impact, it just keeps going.
Right. What were you saying, Nakia?
I think, one of the things that I've always struggled with being on both sides, obviously, before you're a leader, you're a contributor to a team, right? And I think from the side of the transgressor, there's also this thought that if you're forgiven, it means that you're working with someone that's not going to hold you accountable, so you want to extend forgiveness because, a lot of this is character driven too. Right? And you can go through the stages of forgiveness to figure out, okay, how serious is this transgression? How serious what type of impact did you make in this mistake? Right. And based off of that, you might equate whether or not you can forgive or if you do need to hold someone accountable in the ways that we're comfortable with, like a performance action plan or, something else. And I think that sometimes as employees, what I notice, the behavior with staff is if you are not, they don't take accountability unless something is at stake. So then you find yourself wanting to be in this place where you want to say, hey, let's just learn from this lesson. And you want to take a different approach with that employee, but that can be taken advantage of too. And then it goes into a situation where the transgressions become bigger and bigger and bigger. So I know in my roles as a leader, I've kind of had, I've felt that, been in those situations too, because a lot of it depends on the character of the person or the teammate or team member that you are forgiving. Right? Are they going to take advantage of this opportunity to say, let's move past this and take the lesson? Or are they going to, are they going to, change their behaviors at all? You know what I mean? Like,
no, I do. I think the question we have to start, or the way we have to look at it, is that forgiveness does not mean there's no consequence. Because there was an action that caused a transgression, somebody said or did something that caused hurt or harm, or caused a situation to go the wrong direction versus the right, doesn't mean that there is not a consequence for the behavior. So me forgiving you doesn't mean that there is not some level of accountability or a consequence that you might have to face as a result of the transgression. The forgiveness is for me to be able to move beyond the transgression. You understand, especially if we're talking about in the parameters of work. So if it's an associate who has done something that goes outside the policies and procedures, depending upon the level of egregiousness, right? Because, you have some things that it's immediate termination. Like there's nothing I can do about that. But in the grounds where there is something that can be put in place, like a performance improvement plan, where we put you on this scale to say, okay, week over week, here's where I want to see your improvement. That's the consequence for you not meeting your productivity. The forgiveness is that once you come off your PIP, I'm not still talking about your PIP. And I'm not bringing your PIP up when somebody calls me and says, is this a good worker? Because now I'm looking at you from after the PIP is completed to what you've done for the past 3 months. If I haven't forgiven you and I'm holding a grudge, then the first thing I'm going to say is, well, Nakia is a wonderful person and she's grown a lot. But she does have this PIP on file for her. So the moment I say but, anything I said about you that was positive completely goes out of the window, because it's the but indicates the negative. So, right. And so I think what we can't forget is that even in forgiveness, the transgression still has a consequence. Does that make sense?
It does. Mm-hmm.
It does. This is Latifa. The other thing I want to add, hey everybody, is for me, what I have noticed in corporate America is oftentimes the transgressions that happen at work don't violate the policies. And so policies only hold you accountable when you break them. But there's so many other things that happen that are quote unquote within the policies or didn't break the rules. But offense has still taken place. A transgression has still occurred. Yeah. And then there's nothing in the employee manual to address those things, but forgiveness is the right response. And moving through forgiveness is the thing that makes the team able to go forward, allows trust to be restored, allows growth and thriving to continue to happen. But there's nothing in the manual to address it if it didn't break a rule.
So those are those gray areas that you're talking about, Latifa, that happen in the in between, where you absolutely, because it wasn't documented in black and white, and even though it may be against the character of the organization or the character of the person or the morality even of the organization and the person, it gets called into question, which is where your verbal warning comes into play, right? Where there's a conversation, and sometimes it's the step before the verbal. We have a conversation, say, you may not have known, you may not have understood. Let me explain it to you and why this is a violation. And then it's like, do we need to add this? And should this be a conversation that's not isolated between, say, me and Latifa? Perhaps this needs to go across the entire team so that everyone is aware. And if it should happen again, then we move into this kind of corrective action state. But there should be a conversation. Where there is not forgiveness is if I write you up, understanding that this fell in the area of gray, and I didn't count it as that at all. And the first thing I do is put you on a first written. I didn't allow for an opportunity to educate you before I condemned you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the last, go ahead. Was there somebody about to say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say something real quick. So I was just reading something that came up and it talked about actually people really just admitting they're wrong. A lot of times people just don't want to admit that they are wrong. And I think that's one of the things too, that why we don't have forgiveness in the workplace either, because a lot of times people just don't want to admit that they're wrong. And I think one of the things that they talk about being an effective leader is to be able to admit that you are wrong and that you share those opportunities with people to let them know what you have learned from those mistakes. And I think that's kind of some of the things that people may not feel comfortable doing first, because like we said, there is a consequences to that. So first, before we really probably can forgive, we also need to be able to be vulnerable and tell people you're not the only person that would make a mistake. I've made many mistakes, and share those things. But that's not something that really leaders are willing to be vulnerable about.
And there's a reason for that. The culture of the organization dictates your ability to be transparent. There is often punitive consequences for someone who says, I did it. I was wrong. Because we'll see on another slide that we'll talk about a little bit more, that often why forgiveness does not reside in our organizations is because the organization always needs someone to blame. A finger is always pointed at the source or the reason why the process didn't go right. The payment didn't go through. The shipment didn't occur. And so instead of taking collective onus, the moment someone stands up and says, you know what, I am fully responsible as to why this process did not go as it should have. I miscommunicated X, Y, and Z, and therefore the associates didn't understand the assignment. The moment that happens, the person who spoke up and says, I'm the one who did it, if the organization hasn't created a culture of forgiveness, that they are aware that people can make mistakes, and there is a measure in place that says, I recognize the mistake, here's how we mitigate the mistake, here's the consequence for the mistake, but I'm not going to judge you for the mistake. People will not just willingly say, it was me, or I did it. You might see it on the confines of a small team. So like if, say, Nakia is managing all of us, she may have created an atmosphere on her team where I feel comfortable enough to say, you know what, Nakia, I didn't process that right. Or I know you told me to do X, Y, and Z and I didn't get it done. I need 3 more days, 2 more days. She may create that on her team, but even in organizations, you have your team cultures, right? Because every team culture is not the same. And then you have the department culture, you have the business unit culture, and then you have the organization culture. And so unless the organization culture has matriculated down to all of these subcultures, that it is okay to admit that you were wrong, and there is no punitive cost as a result of it outside of learning and understanding, and whatever appropriate consequence, but depending on the egregiousness, right? Then that's why people don't necessarily run to say, it was me. If anybody disagrees, let me know. But that's what I'm thinking, which is why we're having the conversation. The culture doesn't support what we would need for a forgiving culture. And so what we're asking of ourselves, we're unable to do because we're not in a culture that supports that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you have kind of that conflict of people not stepping up. What do you think, Sharon? Since you asked the question. Since you posed it, what do you feel?
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're right. It starts from the top down, and a lot of companies that I've worked for, there are people that just do not want to have those types of conversations, and they're not, and the organization as a whole is just not one that's going to say, okay, hey, yeah, I did it. And then what happens, like you said, then that means that that's the scapegoat most of the time. They have to have some type of a scapegoat if you've lost $20 million that year. And guess what? Everybody's trying to keep a job. I like my job, and I'm pretty sure everyone on this call likes their job. So, of course, we're not always going to be the first person to speak up and say, hey, I made a mistake. But I'll be honest with you. I feel like the times that I have admitted that I was wrong, I have felt really, I felt a sense of relief, because I realized, okay, I am human. That only person who has been perfect has been God, and I'm not him. It will never be, that gracious to be able to be that way. So sometimes it's going to be one of us in that situation, and it calls for us to say, okay, how do we handle that? Knowing that sometimes we are the leader that people are looking up to. And when they really see, okay, so-and-so, that particular person, they admitted that they have done something wrong, then they start to see it is okay for you to say, you know what, I did make a mistake. And what I've learned from that is this. And then people start to see, okay, you know what, that starts to build that type of culture that we able to have this type of conversation. But you're right. It's something that in corporate America, we shun, because we feel like if I admit that I am wrong today, I may not have a job tomorrow.
Right. And I think that's the biggest thing. And like I said, you can create it on your team. And I know you and Cynthia certainly have. And I know Miss Linda probably has as well. And I know I did when I was in operations, that if I made a mistake, I would certainly go to my team members and associates to say, hey guys, what I gave you yesterday was completely wrong. That's my bad, my onus. Here's how we're going to fix it. That's my team though. What does that look like when I go above my team and I'm talking to people that I report into? How does that conversation change, where I have created this environment for those who directly report to me, but I necessarily don't have it to the people that I report into?
Right. Exactly right.
So the last one says that jobs don't do it, or organizations don't do it, because the act of forgiving gives the transgressor permission to commit the injustice again. Now, why would they feel they could commit it again? And that goes back to what you were saying, Nakia, where it becomes like this kind of revolving door. The only reason I would feel like I can do it again is because I experienced no consequence when I did it. I can still forgive you, but the act has a consequence. And if we skip out or leave out that piece that the consequence is not there, then that's where the injustice happens again, because they're like, oh, I got away with it. That's like somebody who is stealing time. I know this has happened several times, not to me, because I went through my time cards with a fine-tooth comb, but I know this happened to a manager where somebody put down that they came in on a Saturday. No, they did it during the week. Every day of the week, they added 30 minutes. Not a big deal, right? Not a big deal. Did it, the time card got approved. Let me do it again. Did 30 minutes every day, add a little bit more. Time card got approved again. So now the person says, you know what? How about I do an hour? Did an hour. Guess what? Hour was paid. Good and paid. So then the person got bold. So this went on for 3 months before it got caught. Went from an hour and then started saying they were coming in on the weekends. And that's when they got bold and brazen and was adding all of these hours on Saturday and Sunday. That's when all of a sudden the red flags came up, because it's like everybody else who's on this program has no Saturday and Sunday hours, but this one person. And they got 8 hours for each day. Went on for 3 months. Now, when it was found out, of course, the manager was let go, because that was egregious. And so was the employee, because you were stealing time. You were getting paid for something that you didn't work for. So, but because the person never got caught, because the manager wasn't doing their due diligence and checking the time card, the person just became more brazen because they never got a consequence. They was like, that went through. Let me try it again. So what we have to make sure is that we're doing what we're supposed to do as managers and leaders of our associates. But then when there is a transgression, that we apply the right consequence to that. But then once that person comes through the consequence successfully, and they've done what they're supposed to do, it's kind of like people who go to prison and they've done their service in time for the crime, and they come out and they can't move anywhere because people keep judging them for the crime that they committed, rather than the time that they served and the person they came out being. They still looking at the person that they were when they went in. And that's what we do in our organizations a lot. People hold people to these mistakes. And a lot of people don't get to move as a result of the mistake. Have you ever went to an organization and you're brand new, and the first thing that the management team does is tell you about the one person that gets on everybody's nerves?
Mm-hmm.
They don't allow you to build a relationship with them. They go ahead and say, girl, let me tell you about so-and-so.
Yep.
So that's somebody who has not been forgiven. And whatever they did 5 months before you got there, now you have a tarnished idea of who this person is because the person decided to feed you the negative parts of this individual without you getting to know the person for yourself. And whatever that person did, obviously, they had moved past it because they were still with the organization. So why are we talking about something that happened 6 months ago versus what the person is doing today?
Takes the focus off of them.
So that's what we have to deal with a lot, which is why forgiveness in the workplace is such an important thing, but something that we don't see. They have to understand what it is and what it means to forgive. And forgiveness, as we talked about within our 6 stages, is not atonement. It is not forgetting what happened. It's not admonishing from your sins and saying you're good and everything is all right. That's not what it is. And I think that's the definition that has been given to it. And so that's how people operate in forgiveness. And so they just don't deal with it. But in the meantime, you have people who are leaving your organizations. Your organizations are a 3-star, 2.5-star, when you could be a 5, because your organization does not have the concept of forgiveness that dwells within it. And we don't teach it. Because of what value would it be if it's spirit-based, religion-based, Bible-based? What do you all think about that? Y'all went real reflective again, like y'all did last week. Y'all got real quiet on me.
That's something to think about.
It is.
Going back, I honestly had not made the correlation between the forgiveness and faith in terms of why it's not addressed like other things culturally in companies.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that in itself, you know, I'm still on slide number 1 there because I just never really thought about it. It has never been present in any organization I've worked with or worked in.
Right.
But, you know, it's an integral part of just, you know, just working with people, right? I mean, whether you're in a leadership role or not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think a lot of the examples we've talked about are, you know, directly tied to, you know, how it would impact the leader and, you know, a team member or someone that you will report to you. But I mean, in my mind, I can think of a lot of different scenarios where forgiveness could be practiced and applied in the workplace, and, you know, how it would really positively impact just the general culture.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in so many ways.
So many.
Coming out of a recent, and I won't go down into the weeds, Nicole, but a recent experience that I had with a company that, I'm no longer present at. I think that there is a significant deficit there and, in extreme ways. So I'm just really, really thinking through what a change that would bring into, that particular organization.
I agree with you. And as you were talking, I was thinking about a program that I was on a company that I worked at. And one of the representatives gave incorrect information to a field rep. And that wrong information kind of traveled up and tainted a lot of things within the process. So the client called and was like, I want him fired. And the organization did not stand up for the person. No one stepped in to say, this was a mistake. They thought they were trying to help. Here's what we're going to do to get this person back on track. You will not experience this again. Let them go. And I thought that was a hugely missed opportunity, because now you have frightened an entire staff in terms of how they communicate on the phone as a result of this one person's mistake. And it was a mistake based off a situation that was not covered in any documentation that the program had. And they just took it and they ran with it. And I was like, what a miss. Now this person is leaving with a negative experience of your organization. They will not discuss you positively if they address anyone who asks about you. Is this a good place to work? Absolutely not. They will fire you just like that for no reason at all.
Right.
So when we don't include forgiveness, even in our work environment, we are damaging. So a lot of times now, because of the transgression, we've damaged the person worse because we didn't apply forgiveness to the situation. And what you did is you just snatched this person's livelihood right from under the rug, instead of putting something in place to say, you know what, we understand it. It was a huge mistake. What's the consequence for that? Now, here's what we're going to do to mitigate it. In the meantime, this is what you are responsible for. And when we see you can handle X, Y, and Z, we'll move you back over here. None of that.
Right. And
client wants you gone, you're gone.
Yeah. And I think that's what strikes me in that example is just like the lack of just, basic humanity. Like you said it, you just completely stripped away this person's livelihood. And how impactful is that to that person on another level, right? And I think that's really how I see a lot of organizations, and maybe this ties back into another reason why they don't discuss forgiveness. It's not just faith-based, but it also has to make them human. It has to make them see people as humans. And I think humanity is sometimes stripped out of, corporate culture, period. Whether it's around faith or whether it's around, just understanding people and their character and having a balanced look at, people work differently. People have different cultures. I think this stretches into different things. People have different beliefs. I think that, it makes people feel like they're just chattel. It makes people feel like they are just a number. They're a utility. They're here to do this thing. And if you don't do this thing the way we want you to do this thing, that is the only thing that matters to me. It doesn't matter to me that, Nicole, that you are, you're pursuing different things, or that you are made up of something other than this role that we have hired you to do.
Right.
And that's another big, I think, a big void in most corporate culture. You don't see people as people.
They're reduced to what they can produce.
Yes. And that's really dangerous. But I think that's common. I mean, that's just what it is.
What does everybody else think about that and listening to Nakia and I talk? Has anybody, no, you're good. Has anybody else experienced, or do you feel the same way, or do you see that in the organizations that you've worked for?
I think there's what you were saying, that the first thing I thought was that that role, that person is expendable. They really don't care. And I think may not be a written policy of forgiveness, but there is a corrective action. People respond differently when in a large organization, they're at a level, mid-level and above, we'll say, because they're given second chances. But when you're like entry level, expendable, and I can hire somebody to do what you do tomorrow, you become, like she said, cattle. Because like where I work, we can't hire somebody. Like you have to have a college degree. You have to have training. So it's imperative that we retain staff. Okay. So it's important that we invest in those people because we can't hire somebody tomorrow. That person just doesn't exist that quickly. So I think there's a difference in the tier. Like I think if that had been a vice president who had screwed something up, they would have got that, oh, they messed up. We got to figure out what do we need to do, rally behind this person. And it does end up being, most of the time it ends up being, because in that situation, you're looking at a client who pumps millions into a company versus somebody who's makes $30,000 a year. And they don't see any value in that person. Because you can't live off 30,000. But that's why they expect, there's an expectation of turnover at a certain level. So they don't want to invest in you because they feel like you're going to leave anyway. They make it horrendous. So there is never an investment. There's never a need to actually do this. So I think, I mean, I don't know that my company doesn't have a forgiveness. I wouldn't say that, but there's room for growth and errors, and we correct the errors and we talk about it and we work it out. But I mean, that's just the nature of my industry. We have no choice.
And that's forgiveness. All of that you said is forgiveness. And I get what you're saying, Andrea, because the larger the organization, it does become this kind of cattle mentality because I can hire someone to do what you do tomorrow. But I also know that we spend thousands on hiring and training individuals. And when we talk about the situation that we're in now with COVID, now we're shipping equipment. So it's not as cheap, you know, versus you coming into a building and sitting down to equipment to now I'm shipping you equipment. So that even looks different. And then the millions of dollars it takes to train a person, bring them in, give them benefits. So there is some cost and expenditure, but I agree with you in terms of the client is pumping in millions. This is a mere $30,000 salary. How do I weigh it? So if the millions wants to get rid of $30,000, let's get rid of $30,000. So I guess the question becomes, how do organizations balance the mentality? Because a lot of organizations preach within those walls, even if they are large, development, opportunities, advancement, growth, but it's preached on these large scales, but you don't see any action of it actually occurring. And then you have fallout where individuals feel stuck, like they can't move, and ultimately leave as a result of that. So I think for me, that even if you're a large organization and you value employees, because when you value the employees, the asks that you have in terms of how your clients are taken care of happen organically, because you have an individual who feels appreciated and valued for what they do, even if all I'm doing is indexing a document. If I feel valued in that task, I'm going to be the best person indexing a document that you have ever seen in your life. And there's value in that as well, because now I have an individual who has knowledge of my organization that if I move them up, I don't have to retrain the whole wheel. I just have to give you this another set of skills. I'm not starting over from scratch. So I think that there is an advantage to incorporating forgiveness, that even when those mistakes occur, I don't toss you to the side. I understand the value you have because of the history and knowledge that you have from our organization. And so now what I'm going to do is explain to you why this was a mistake, initiate whatever consequence applies to that, but then say, okay, after this, here's how we're going to make sure that this mistake doesn't happen again. And then you continue to grow within the organization. The problem is that piece doesn't happen and people aren't growing, they're leaving or they're getting let go. Tom, I saw you shaking your head. Is everybody still reflective? This one touches home. I told you it was going to be a little bit more serious this week when we started talking about the actual places where forgiveness could reside. So, in talking, what'd you say, Sharon? I'm sorry.
I was saying, no, this, when we were thinking, I was saying this is powerful, Nicole, because it makes you think about exactly what Andrea said, you know, the different realms and different companies, but also just how the different levels of the organization, the people where they come in, the entry level up to, like she said, the vice presidents or up to the president and different things. Like you're right. It's kind of like you're right. You see that mistakes for a little man, that person can lose their job tomorrow, but you're correct. If a person is up, that's probably higher up on the executive level, that person is probably given another chance. The forgiveness is there. So you're exactly right. I never thought about it. She said, like, she's probably right. I mean, she is right.
Yeah, she is right.
She is right. And so it's kind of like, you don't think about those things until you really kind of see them in action. And sometimes we're so used to the hustle and bustle of what we do each and every day that we don't take time out to say, is that really happening? Is that is the promotion and the advancement, is that really truly happening as much as people promote it? Just like you just said. And sometimes, like you said, I know many people that I felt like they should have been way farther than where they are in an organization. And then you realize that they did one thing back in 2000 or 2015, and that holds that person back from being promoted because of the bias that they have around their brand. Because the first thing people you hear right now is your brand. What's your brand? Right. What's this? And then what happens is that the first thing that you do wrong, it tarnishes your brand, and then they want to throw you in the trash. Just like Miss Cent says, what you say, Miss Cent? Throw away the baby with the bathwater. That's what they do for you. And it's frightening, because just like the scenario you said earlier, a person was let go because they made one mistake. What happened was the repercussions were long and deep. What happened is that they taught everyone else on that particular team to not go outside of what that work instruction, that policy said. You do exactly what we say, or guess what? You will not have a job. And that starts to limit people innovation, them to speak out, them to think about brand new ideas to bring on. So what you're doing is you're limiting people in a space of what you wrote out in a policy. And that's crazy, because now you're not promoting person to think outside of the box. But the first thing everybody says, we want you to think outside of the box. So it's contradicting it. And they're not
creating the culture where you can. It's not creating. Yeah, it's not creating the culture where you can. And the bottom line is no longer the people, but the money. And I think Andrea pointed out that beautifully when she gave her scenario for the $1 million organization and the $30,000 salary. So we're not even looking at people no more. I'm looking at the money. What's the bottom line in terms of revenue? And basically back to what Nakia and Andrea said, you are expendable. If I'm just looking at the dollars, 25 million, 30,000. Who you think gonna win?
Yeah, not me.
Not you, Sherry. So forgiveness is not absolution. And I think we covered a lot of that in our conversation last Wednesday when we were talking through our stages. It is not an absolution. that this person's hurt did not have an impact. So we are not absolving anyone from what they did. There is a consequence, and we must hold individuals accountable for the transgression. Forgiveness is not for us to forget. And that was the lively part of the conversation towards the end of the call when we talked about not forgetting, because in forgetting, I'm losing my lesson. Because when there is an act where it requires one to forgive, there is also a lesson learned in the forgiving. So it does not require us to forget when we talk about forgiveness. Also, forgiveness is intentional culture. So that goes back to our organization. You have to be intentional in your willingness to forgive. And perhaps you don't want to call it forgiveness, but it's an opportunity to look at mistakes, put measures in place where we don't define people by their mistakes. We go over the error, we fix the error, we put things in place so that the error doesn't happen again, and we allow people to continue to grow and thrive. Maybe people don't want to use the word forgiveness. Maybe it touches too closely to spirituality and faith-based living, but forgiveness resides wherever hurt can be found. I can't say that enough, and hurt can be found in the workplace. Forgiveness does not define the organization. So it is a culture within an organization acknowledging upfront opportunity for mistakes to be made and does not allow every mishap to in turn be placed under scrutiny, be cast into a spotlight, or be used to define the individual going forward. That is what we seem to be seeing, though, in a lot of what we see within our organizations. And where work goes wrong is, and we talked about this earlier, the central reason this is difficult at work is due to the organizational and legal parameters creating workplace cultural norms. These norms do not foster or support acts of forgiveness. Someone or something must always be at the center to blame or lay fault on. God forbid we let the person or persons off the hook. What would that say about the organization? The fear surrounding the act of forgiveness implies the organization believes this would be a signal to condone such behavior, and it would undermine accountability, setting a bad example for other employees. Sharon, in your last statement, you already proved that statement to be incorrect, because you indicated that because the person made a mistake and the swift action of taking them out of the position and removing them from work actually had a ripple effect and longer repercussions, because now you have impacted and affected and affected a team as a result of you removing the individual in the way that you did.
Yep.
So now so now you have a group that are non-thinkers, only policy readers. They will ask you every time something goes wrong. So now you have somebody who's going to come to their manager every time they don't know the answer. And even sometimes when they do, to get confirmation from you that it's okay to do what they need to do.
And Nicole, it also puts you in a position of when you do a recap of the recap, because it's like, okay, well, I've recapped this, but now you done sent something back. I'm gonna recap this again because I'm not gonna be put in this position again, because you're gonna always kind of have that underlying fear of, okay, this can happen again. So I got to recap to the recap to make sure I got this straight.
Right.
And so it puts you in that position where you are afraid to think, you are afraid to make certain moves. But then again, that backfires on you also, because then it throws you into another realm of, okay, well, he or she can't think for herself, have to always confirm, but they don't realize where that has placed an individual, and why something, like workplace forgiveness is so important. And I think that a lot of companies confuses that, because they feel like if you're asking for an apology so you can forgive them. There's a lot of people think you requiring an apology. but that's not what you're seeking, you know. So I think that's why a lot of companies veer from it too, because they feel like, okay, if I apologize to her, that's going to make it feel like, you know, she was right or I was wrong, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and when we talked about it last week, I don't need you to say I'm sorry. And if I go into my forgiveness stages seeking the transgressor to apologize and to acknowledge, I may be sorely disappointed because of that. That's why forgiveness is for the person and not for the person who caused the hurt.
Exactly.
They don't, and you're right. There's a level of not understanding that, which is why it's also not implemented, because I can't show my hand or my sign of weakness by telling this person I acknowledge I did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and you remember in the first side, it says it's a sign of weakness to forgive. And so now it's like my hand is being shown and I'm not as strong as I thought I was, because this forgiveness is on the table, when in actuality, you are showing your power when you do so. And your ability to affect in a positive way as a result. So we have a case study. There's a few questions, and it's Miss Amy. And so she kind of embodies a lot of what we discussed here. So we have Amy, who's a customer service rep, Rebecca, who was Amy's old manager, and Eric, who is Amy's new manager. And then we have the organization where Amy works. So those are the characters in our study. So if everyone would turn in their books, if you have them, and you want to go to page, where is it? Things, I'm trying to remember what page she was on. Amy's case study, I think, starts on page 37, I think it is. Maybe 37, or it might be page 40.
I think it's 30.
30? Oh,
30,
okay.
Nicole.
30, okay. Page 30. And so this is a story about Amy. It's a little video that will play, but it coincides with what's in your book. And then we're going to answer some questions. So this is Miss Amy.
Amy's story. Amy has worked for Syntex Healthcare for about 4 months. She loves what she does and enjoys working with her fellow colleagues and peers. Amy feels her management team is understanding and supportive, and she's looking forward to her future with the organization. We are meeting Amy on the morning she has just found out a childhood friend passed away in their sleep. Her death is sudden, and Amy is devastated. Amy picks up the phone to hear Tim's voice on the other end. Hi, Amy. Tim here. I have some really bad news. Gloria passed away in her sleep last night. The family is really scrambling right now. Once I know more, I will reach back out. Amy responds, Oh no. Thanks so much for letting me know. So hard to believe we lost her. I know. Still trying to process it myself. I will call you back once I know more. Okay, I'll talk to you then. Amy hangs up the phone and tries to regain her composure because she knows she has work ahead of her today. As devastated as Amy is, she finds her way into work and hears the hustle and bustle of all of the associates working as she goes to her desk. She is absolutely determined to get through this day because she knows the team is short-staffed. Some of the team members have been pulled to work a special project. It's about 10 minutes until Amy is supposed to take her lunch break, and she feels rather good about how she has handled her day thus far. But then she receives a call from Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown has called Syntex with regards to the copay program. He has questions about his enrollment and wants to make sure he understands the claim process really well. Amy takes time to walk through the steps of the process with him. She finds after about 30 minutes that Mr. Brown is struggling to understand what the copay program is and the process for how a claim is pulled through and paid. Amy offers at this point in the conversation for him to either speak with his supervisor, and she even offers another colleague or peer to join the phone call to ensure that Mr. Brown understands the process fully. Mr. Brown becomes extremely frustrated by this offer and demands that Amy takes responsibility for her job and ensures that she explains the process to him thoroughly. Amy spends another 10 to 15 minutes on the phone with Mr. Brown. Both parties become extremely aggravated and frustrated as Mr. Brown still is having trouble comprehending the components of the copay program and how his claims will be processed for payment. After another 5 minutes on the phone, Amy gets entirely frustrated and simply hangs up. Later on in the break room, while eating her lunch, Amy thinks about her phone call with Mr. Brown and considers how she responded in the conversation. It is then that she realizes after her reflection that she was wrong in how she managed her call. If it had been any other day but today, Amy knows full well in her heart that she would never have responded in the way that she did when speaking with Mr. Brown. She has decided that once lunch is over, she will go speak to her manager, Rebecca. Amy walks down the hallway and meets her manager, Rebecca, in her office, and she asks, can she speak with her? Rebecca responds, yes. So, Amy sits down and begins to share with Rebecca the incident with Mr. Brown on the phone and the fact that she had hung up the phone on him. Rebecca pauses for a moment after hearing this information and shares with Amy that she does appreciate her bringing the information to her. She has suggested to Amy to let her review the call and that she would get back with her at the end of business today to let her know what next steps would be. Amy felt this was a fair decision and decided that she would go back to her desk. Before leaving the office, she thanks Rebecca for listening to her and share what happened on the call and her state of being on today. Rebecca admires Amy for coming to her and telling her about the phone call versus them finding out by doing a call audit. Amy leaves the office to finish her shift and work the end of the day. On the next day, when Amy returns to the work office, Rebecca, her manager, takes her into the conference office and shares that she and 2 other managers from the team pulled the call for review. Based on the call results and her coming forward, she would be placed on a 30-day probationary period versus a 60-day probationary period. Rebecca exclaimed her coming forward and taking accountability is what reduced the probation period. Rebecca also stated that she would now go under a call review for 1 out of 5 calls versus their normal protocol of 1 out of 20. Rebecca passed Amy the phone policy along with the probation details. Amy took it, looked over it, and signed it, indicating she understood and she would comply. Amy was saddened, but she was also very hopeful. She returned to her desk to complete the remainder of her shift. 6 months later, Amy gets a new manager, and his name is Eric Hunter. He is a fresh face to the organization and does not know a lot about what Syntex does, but he does have manager experience. Amy teaches Eric about the team, what they do, and where they fall in the process for the company. Amy even helps by taking on additional reporting responsibilities to help Eric learn and ensure team stats are communicated timely to upper management. Amy feels she is on the right track as she soared through her 30-day probation and since then has been a wonderful asset to the team. 6 more months pass and Amy goes to Eric and shares that she would like to pursue opportunities outside the team. Eric seems thrilled and says he will do all he can do to help her. But there appeared to be an incident involving her that he would also need to address. Apparently, whatever this incident is that has been called into question could determine Amy's eligibility to move. The only incident, though, that immediately came to Amy's mind was the call that she had with Mr. Brown. But that was over a year and a half ago. Surely she had proven herself by now and there was no longer an issue, right? Amy thought to herself, haven't I done all I needed to do to prove that that was a mistake? Surely they would not let me train and assist Eric how I do if they felt I hadn't grown or proven myself. Amy continues to post for numerous opportunities within the organization for another year, but is never selected. Her interviews always get great feedback, but movement has never happened for her. Amy finally decides the best thing for her to do is to leave the organization altogether, and she accepts a position somewhere else. Although Amy's situation in some respects is an exaggeration, it points out what happens when forgiveness is not extended and we become defined by the mistake or mistakes we have made rather than how we overcame them.
What do you all think about Miss Amy?
Wow, that's a very good story. I like that. That story actually tells the tale in jobs that I worked in the past.
Mm. Mm.
Not
I know
necessarily me, but other
other people.
I've known other people. Just
Other people. Oh, okay.
Other people.
Other people. Sadly, it is something that certainly happens, but we can also dissect it in terms of what Amy was experiencing or going through in terms of what happened that day. So if we look at it, could Amy have done anything better?
I don't think so. I mean, she knows she jacked up that call. She knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were probably gonna catch it. So I in my opinion, because I worked at call centers before, so in my opinion, I think that she did the right thing by going to management first. Just go ahead and put it out there, because I think even in some call centers, hanging up on a customer, there's no real reason to ever hang up on a customer. So in some call centers, that's an automatic termination.
Mm-hmm. Do you all think she should have stayed home?
I don't know. I think that's, it's kind of a personal choice, right? I mean, she had one bad call. I respect the fact that she came to work and she just decided to try to power through. And then she actually was self-reflective enough to say, you know what, these are the circumstances that led me to do this. Let me just step up and admit I was wrong. Right. And I didn't get the sense that she even went to report it, because she felt like, well, let me say something before they say something to me. It was more that she felt a sense of guilt, and wanted to take accountability for her actions. So I think that she did the right thing for the organization, for the sake of her job, and also probably for herself, because she felt like she knew what she did wasn't right.
Wasn't right.
And the part of her should she have stayed home? Well, at that point in time, she put the company before her feelings, because she was like, they're already short-staffed. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to do my very best to muddle through this day so I don't let my team down, because they really need me. Should she have stayed home? Possibly. But how we all are guilty of, I'm going to muddle through this day and I'm going to give it my best shot. But sometimes, things are so emotional, you can't do that. And that's when this type of stuff happens. But I do admire her for the accountability, knowing I shouldn't have hung up that call. She thought about it all through lunch, and she went on and did what she should have done. And that was take the accountability. And she was willing to take the brunt that come behind it, although that was excessive to me. So
right. It was.
Yeah.
So what role did Eric play, the new manager? What could he have done better?
It seems like he was, first of all, what she did over a year and a half ago, should never even come into play. Because, I mean, obviously he knew about the infraction. Okay, so it happened, and then she completed her probationary period. No, it's done. That shouldn't even come into play in the scenario of her trying to move up in that company.
And what about what she was doing to help him? Pulling reports, sending things up to senior management, helping the team.
Right.
Yeah, she was going to do all that stuff, but she wasn't good enough to be promoted, though.
Have you ever seen that happen before? I'm not good enough to be promoted, but you can give me every responsibility that's associated with this team and I knock it out of the park. But when I say I want to move or go somewhere, all of a sudden my past comes up and I can't move. But I'm a rock star on the team, but I can't go anywhere.
And as far as Eric is concerned, I kind of feel like when there was a changing of the guards, I feel like the culture changed hands, also the culture of the prior management team, because that could have possibly happened. And Eric didn't think on his own. I think he thought of the culture that was basically handed to him, that he took over from people that knew nothing about forgiveness and was not willing to let it go themselves. And in order for him to know that she had that on her record, someone had to basically mention that to him.
I would say so, because he came 6 months later. It shouldn't even be a topic of conversation at this point. Right.
Exactly. Someone had to have mentioned that to him. And evidently there had not been an evaluation between he and Amy. You know, she had not had an evaluation or whatever with him. I think someone probably have mentioned that that incident to him, and it stuck with him. And unknowing that, you know, you can't hold people accountable over and over and over again. You know, for that act, you know, for that mistake.
Correct. So what did you think about Rebecca when she listened to Amy and then her outcome on the next day when she came to work?
Excessive.
You thought it was excessive?
Yeah.
Extremely.
And on top of that, she had to bring in 2 other individuals when she was relaying that message. I feel like she wasn't confident in, you know, in making that decision. She had to have backup.
Right.
You know, she had to bring backup because she probably didn't know how this is going to go. And, you know, she had to bring backup to make sure that she wasn't tripping over herself. But I think what she did was very excessive, and she's not comfortable in her role.
So you all don't think that she reduced the probation from 60 to 30? Because Amy came and talked to her?
But she saddled her with 1 out of 5, you know, all of these phone audits. You know, she also added an extra penalty there with the extra phone audits, and where they was doing 1 out of 20. What were they doing now? 1 out of 5?
1 out of 5.
Oh, yeah. And that, when it's in itself, you know, is actually nerve-wracking. Just give me the 60 days probation and keep the phone audits.
They were probably coupled together in terms of if there was a policy on, you know, what happens if this is a scenario, somebody hangs up on a patient or a customer.
Right.
She probably had to do both. I don't know. I kind of sympathize for her a little bit because it's a rock and a hard place. Maybe, you know, and this is making an assumption, maybe she kind of had a little bit of, had some heart and really, really, you know, felt for the situation, because she's the one that has the history with Amy in terms of understanding who Amy is as a person and her work ethic and everything. So maybe I think she did display some lack in confidence in going to her peers. But maybe she was just trying to exercise like an unbiased, you know, punishment or, you know, consequence, better statement. Because we talked about that. It is an infraction. It is something that would come up on an audit one way or the other. It is something that could potentially be, you know, kind of escalated. We don't know what Mr. Brown is going to do next. So yeah, there has to be some action taken.
Right. Bert, you got your hand up?
Yes, ma'am. I was just, because I've worked at a call center, and back then, I think as far as Rebecca is concerned, she did what she was supposed to do,
Mhm.
but I often feel that in management, they forget that you're dealing with humans. I know you're dealing with, protocols and
Mhm.
so many calls have to be made per day and so forth and so on.
Right.
But I believe that they forget they're dealing with humans. I say that to say I worked in a call center. One of the main rules that we ever had was you can't have your cell phone on your desk.
Mm.
When my mom was sick, my manager allowed me to have my cell phone on my desk. When I got the call that I needed to rush to the hospital, I was on a customer service call.
Mhm.
I immediately put the phone down. So I can't even tell you what happened to that person, that client that was on that phone call at that moment.
Right.
I never got written up. I don't know what happened to the call. She shut my computer down and I went on about my life. Like there was never any repercussions. I didn't get called into the office and saying, well, you should have done X, Y, or Z. At that moment, she understood as a human, I needed to go take care of this emergency.
Mhm.
So I think it's yes, all policies are in place, but it's really like if Amy is explaining my best friend, they found my best friend dead this morning,
Mhm.
where's the human compassion
Mhm.
at the end of the day?
Mhm.
Forgiveness or not, like where's the human part of it?
Mhm.
That's the hard part that, I'm in management now and you're looking at it and you're looking at people and where do you cut it off? Where do you cut off work and humanity?
Right. Where's the
Nicole,
balancing? Uh-huh. Mhm.
I look at Rebecca also, is that it always come down to what we've always talked about is knowing your associates and formulating a relationship with them,
Mhm.
and it appears that Amy has always been a rock star, but they were allowing just this one moment in time,
Mhm.
and she was dealing with some really serious issues, and like they said, they took the humanistic side out of it. And although there are rules and regulations that needs to be followed or applied, but you've got to also have empathy. And Rebecca threw the empathy out the door and just went straight rule based. And she took it, Amy took it well, but I can really, because I've been an Amy, so I can kind of know what Amy was thinking. Okay, I'm gonna take the hit. I'm gonna take it,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna see where this road ends. And
Mhm.
sometimes that kind of stuff never ends because people are so unwilling to let it go, whether it's people or whether it's something in a folder
Mhm.
that's or someone has come up on. So you've got to keep empathy. Call center, whatever type of environment it is that you're working in, you've got to formulate those relationships. You've got to know your people. You got to know
Mhm.
them. And because if you don't have that, if you don't have that with them, it's going to bring you to Rebecca with the hardcore uh you know lashing on Amy.
Yeah.
And they just let that one mistake, and they
One
lost a
mistake.
great opportunity off of a person making one mistake, and the person took accountability for it. She didn't lie about it. Say, I didn't hang up on that man. Yeah, I hung up on him. He was just being irate. She took she took accountability of it. They didn't even take any of that into consideration. She kind of verbally mentioned, well, we appreciate you coming forth on it,
Mhm.
but they still gave her the full letter of the law, when
Well, they reduced it a little bit. They didn't give her
Yeah.
60, they gave her 30. I think if Amy could have done anything different, because I know we've all gone to work and struggled through.
mm-hmm,
I think the one thing that she could have done differently is spoken to her manager before she ever got on the phone
mm-hmm,
and told them where she was in terms of her mindset and what had occurred. Because that could have been an opportunity to say for management, today we're not going to put you on phones. I'm going to pull you and I'm going to put you over here. I think that's the one thing that she could have done differently. I absolutely commend her for taking onus when she hung up, but I think she could have communicated her state of being prior to getting on the phone. and let her management know then versus having an incident happen with Mr. Brown and then having to apologize for it. If I said anything. And I think as a result, that would be the one thing I said she could have done differently.
Yep. And I think as Black people,
no, I
have seen it.
But no, I mean, I get it because we are often told, check your feelings at the door. Whenever you come into work, whatever is going in, when you walk through the doors of your organization, check them at the door and leave them there, pick them back up when you're ready to go home. And we know sometimes that's just not possible. But if anything could have been done differently, that's the one thing I would have said, because that could have provided an opportunity to be put on another task that didn't involve the interaction with customers and or patients in that way. But I certainly get why she didn't, because I know I've gone to work and been in a place and didn't say nothing to nobody and just was like, we're going to make it go through, and just took them 5-10 quick breaths before we did what we were supposed to do, and just like fix my face, fix my mouth, fix my words, and go on to the next thing. So I certainly get it. But I just thought that was a story that we could all look at and kind of evaluate to see what could be done differently. And did we think that the punishment fit the crime? Yeah. I don't think the punishment fit the crime, especially if she had been a rock star up until that day. And after she made the mistake, took accountability and communicated the mistake, said why she made the mistake, you know, shared her state of mind, her state of being. I do think that there was some concession made and that they dropped the probation from the 60 to 30 days. But I think also 1 out of every 5 was a bit excessive. Maybe it's 1 out of every 10, since typically it's 1 out of every 20. So I think, you know, there were other opportunities for it to be better. And I think Eric should have completely dismissed, even if somebody mentioned her transgression after he got there. He knew what she was capable of and what she was doing under his tenure. That's the only thing that mattered when it was time for her to move.
Let me your motive. I don't think Eric wanted her to move.
I think he wanted to keep the knowledge with him on the team.
She was helping Eric look good.
Yeah. What'd you say, Bertina? You said something?
I said I was about to say the same thing. Eric didn't want her to move. If she can do all these reports and make him look like he's the bomb manager, he's keeping her around for a reason.
So he didn't want to let the knowledge go. He kept her for him. That's happened. Has that ever happened to anybody else? That's happened to me. I found out about it later, but I was held back from a job because they didn't want the information to lead the team. Sharon, it happened to you too?
Sorry.
I think I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I couldn't get off fast enough. I'm sorry. I was on a team and I was telling them that I was really going to move on and learn something new and go to the next level. And it was taken as a disappointment because, well, why are you wanting to move on? Why are you wanting to do this? And I'm like, because I know I need to grow. I need to learn and move on and challenge myself. But because I was doing all the reports, I was learning things that other people weren't learning. Like you said, they were so, I was a rock star. They didn't want to lose that knowledge set, but that was only because of their benefit. I wasn't benefiting from it. I learned things, but I wanted to continue to challenge myself and grow. And really, be honest with you, because I left that particular team, that probably severed that relationship with that manager. And it's sad, but that's really true. People will think that, okay, I'm leaving you, not the position. I'm leaving you. And then that's been probably held against me with that particular manager.
So that was a situation where you had to forgive.
I had to forgive, but they haven't forgiven me.
That's not on you.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah, that's not on you.
Yeah. So
I know we are a little bit over, but we started a little bit late. But to close us out this pre-Thanksgiving Eve, to be a better leader, there are about 5 things that it's asking us to do in terms of implementing an atmosphere and environment of forgiveness. When we do so, it creates an environment where team members participate. If I know I'm going to be forgiven, but also understand that there are consequences. And I think we fail to do that, that there is a consequence for your behavior. Just like we talked about the employee handbook with the matrix and the policies and procedures. If these things aren't followed, if these goals aren't met, here are the consequences for those. And that happens even when there are things that occur that fall outside of those parameters. Forgiveness also creates an environment where team members thrive. It creates an environment where team members feel a part of a community. It also creates an environment attractive to others. When they see this team operating in that way, people was like, I want to go work for that manager. Has anybody ever said that before? I want to go work for them. I want to go be on that team. There's something about that team just like, I want to go over there. They seem to really have it together. And then it creates an environment of integrity and accountability. And we've kind of talked about that throughout the presentation on today in terms of what forgiveness looks like when it's in our workplace. So this has been a really good conversation. I've learned a lot. I hope you all have as well in terms of what forgiveness means and how we can start to implement it in our workplaces, even if it starts on just your team first, right? Forgiveness is a big elephant, or our organizations is a big elephant. You're gonna have to take a piece at a time. So if we infiltrate it on our teams first, we can start to create hopefully a ripple effect where it passes from one team to the next, where forgiveness just becomes a part of our culture and how we interact in our workplace. And people aren't defined by the mistake, but how they overcame the mistake. Any closing remarks from the group? How do you all feel about the session on today?
Great session. Loved it.
Great.
Absolutely awesome.
Part two.
That's awesome.
Part two.
Sherry,
I love this.
you just need prayer.
Relax on that, Sharon. Relax, baby.
Well, I thank you all so much for joining. I thank you all for the conversation. It definitely was really fruitful. I certainly enjoyed myself, and I have certainly learned a lot. I want you all to have a wonderful Thanksgiving on tomorrow with your families. Eat as much as you want to, pass out as much as you want to, wake back up and start eating again if you want to. It's all off the table. Tomorrow you have a free pass to do whatever you want involving food and sleep. So I hope you all have a happy Turkey Day. Thank you all so much for joining, and I will see you all next week for our final session where we talk about forgiveness at home.
All right.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving,
Thank you
everyone.
all. Be safe, everybody.